The wind carried a sound like grief itself, long, hollow, and endless. 3 shapes moved slowly across the white wilderness, bent against the cold that cut through skin and memory alike. The old Apache woman led them, her back curved but unbroken, her breath visible ghosts in the air. At 55, she had outlived battles, hunger, and the slow erasure of her people, but she had never outlived love. Her daughters followed, 2 fragile flames in a storm, the elder 22, the younger 20, wrapped in what little warmth remained to them. Every step was a prayer. Every mile, a refusal to surrender. They had been turned away from every door between here and the mountains. Settlers had met them with rifles, not words. No room. No food. No mercy. They had knocked with trembling hands, asking not for pity but for life. And each time, the world had closed its heart. The old woman's voice, once strong enough to call down rain, had grown hoarse from pleading. Now she spoke only to the wind, whispering to her ancestors that she would not let her daughters die in the open. Somewhere ahead, she saw a thin line of smoke twisting into the gray sky. A cabin. Hope, faint but alive. Inside that cabin, a man of 30 sat beside a dim fire, sharpening a knife not for violence but for work. He was a cowboy by trade, a wanderer by soul, born under open sky and loneliness. His beard carried the frost of many winters, his eyes the softness of a man who'd known loss too young. A photograph rested on the table beside him, his mother, smiling faintly, forever frozen in a better time. The storm outside had been his only companion for days, howling against the boards like a restless ghost. When the knock came, it startled even the fire. It was not a gentle knock, it was desperation wrapped in skin and bone. He hesitated only long enough to wonder if it was real. Then he rose, pulled open the door, and faced the blizzard head-on. What he saw made the knife slip from his hand. 3 figures, half buried in snow, eyes hollow yet defiant. The old woman's lips trembled. "No one gives us shelter," she said softly, words nearly lost to the wind. The cowboy didn't ask who they were or why they had come. He simply stepped aside, his voice steady as a prayer. "Then you'll have shelter here." They entered quietly, as if afraid kindness might vanish if they moved too loudly. The cabin filled with their breath, their shivers, their gratitude. He gave them bread soaked in warm broth, his own portion forgotten. The younger daughter smiled through chattering teeth, a fragile brightness returning to her eyes. The elder stayed silent, her posture guarded, the weight of mistrust heavy from too many cruelties. The old woman murmured words in her native tongue, hands shaking as she held them near the fire, blessing the warmth, blessing the stranger who had opened his door. 4 hours, the storm raged outside, the walls trembling under its fists. Yet within, something softer stirred. The cowboy listened to their quiet stories, bits of laughter between pauses, songs hummed under breath, memories spoken in fragments. They told him how their tribe had been driven from the riverlands, how they'd walked for days with nothing but faith. He didn't answer with pity. He listened the way the earth listens to rain, silent but receptive. When the old woman's eyes met his, she saw not a savior, but a son she might have once had. Night came heavy, pressing against the windows. The cowboy laid extra blankets beside the hearth. "The floor's cold," he said, "but the fire's yours." He turned to mend the door latch, but his mind lingered on their faces, the resilience etched into their cheeks, the quiet dignity even in exhaustion. When the women finally slept, he remained awake, staring into the orange heart of the fire. His mother's words returned to him, soft and steady. "Kindness is the only home a soul can build in this world." Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but they sounded far away. Inside, peace held its ground. The cowboy's thoughts drifted between memory and present, between what he'd lost and what had just arrived at his doorstep. He looked toward the sleeping figures, the old woman curled close to her daughters, their bodies drawn together like a single thread of survival. Something in him eased, something long frozen began to thaw. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. The world outside lay still, white, forgiving. The cowboy stepped to the door and opened it to the pale light. The air smelled clean, almost sacred. Behind him, the old woman stirred awake, her eyes following his silhouette framed in the doorway. She whispered, barely audible, "You remind me of my son." He turned slowly, the words catching in his chest. "And you remind me of my mother." The fire crackled softly between them, echoing something older than both, something shared between every soul that's ever longed for shelter in a world too cold to care. And as the light spilled across the cabin floor, he felt it, an unseen shift, quiet but certain. Strangers had crossed his threshold in the storm, but by morning he was no longer alone. Yet outside, the horizon still glimmered with unfinished stories, and he couldn't shake the sense that this beginning, was only the calm before another kind of storm. The snow began to melt in quiet surrender, retreating from the land like a ghost who'd finally found peace. The cabin that had once stood as a lonely outpost now breathed with life, smoke curling from its chimney, laughter echoing faintly through its walls. The old Apache woman moved gently through the space, her hands steady as she stirred the pot hanging over the fire. The smell of herbs and corn filled the air, earthy and warm. Her two daughters helped her with practiced rhythm, their movements a kind of unspoken music. The younger, quick with laughter, brought wildflowers inside each morning, pressing color back into a world that had forgotten it. The elder moved slower, quieter, her thoughts heavier than her steps. And the cowboy, the man who had opened his door to them, watched the rhythm of their lives begin to blend with his own. He had lived years without hearing another voice in the mornings, without someone to share the silence of coffee and sunrise. Now, when he looked up from his work, there was always someone there, herbs drying by the window, a soft hum rising from the old woman's throat, the sound of gentle feet moving over wooden floors. He found himself fixing things he hadn't cared about before, the crooked shelf, the squeaky hinge, the leaky roof, as though each nail and plank were an offering to this fragile piece. In the evenings, they sat together around the fire. The old woman spoke of her people's ways, of the spirits that lived in rivers and stones, of the songs that healed. The cowboy listened as though each word were a lesson the earth itself had been trying to teach him. The younger daughter laughed often, her joy unguarded, reminding him of a sister he'd lost to fever when he was a boy. But the elder, she was different. Her eyes carried the weight of distance, even when she sat close. When she spoke, it was with thoughtfulness, as though every word cost her something precious. One night, when the wind sighed through the cracks in the door, she asked him why he'd helped them. He thought for a long time before answering. "Because no one helped my mother," he said finally. "And I promised myself, if I ever met someone in need, I'd be the door that stayed open." She looked at him for a long while, her face softened by the firelight, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than gratitude. It was the first time she smiled without fear. As spring crept closer, the land transformed. Rivers broke free from their icy cages, the soil breathed again, and life returned in small, defiant ways. The cowboy taught them to plant corn along the edge of the clearing, to mend fences, to ride the old mare that had been lonely in her pen. The elder daughter worked beside him, her hands roughening, her laughter hesitant but real. He found himself watching her more than he meant to, the way sunlight touched her hair, the grace hidden beneath the scars of survival. The old woman saw it too. She would smile to herself, saying nothing, only whispering quiet blessings when neither of them noticed. The younger daughter teased her sister gently, and the elder would blush, pretending not to care. Yet, as the days lengthened, the air between her and the cowboy grew charged, like a sky waiting for thunder. Then came the day of trial. A group of settlers rode through the valley, 4 men with faces hard as stone, searching for supplies, or perhaps something crueler. They saw the women outside the cabin, their Apache features catching the men's sneers like bait. Words were exchanged, ugly, bitter words that tasted of hatred. The cowboy stepped out, his revolver resting loose at his side. His voice was calm, but there was iron in it. "They're under my roof," he said, his stance unyielding. "You'll show them respect, or you'll ride on." The men stared at him, measuring his resolve. One spat in the dirt, muttered a curse, and turned his horse. The others followed, their scorn trailing behind them like dust. The silence they left was heavy, filled with the echo of what could have been. The old woman's eyes glistened with tears she didn't try to hide. She reached out and laid her weathered hand on the cowboy's arm, a blessing without words. In that moment, Something sacred settled in the space between them all, a covenant of trust, born not of blood but of shared courage. That night, the elder daughter stood with him outside beneath the stars. The air was cool, fragrant with the scent of thawing earth. "You didn't have to stand for us," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Yes, I did." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time saw not a stranger, not a savior, but a man, flawed, kind, human. Her heart, long frozen in fear, began to thaw. They stood close, silence blooming between them like wildflowers after rain. No words could have carried the weight of that moment. The fire from inside flickered across their faces, and when their hands brushed, neither pulled away. The touch was small, almost accidental, yet it carried the force of a promise. One neither dared to speak aloud. The old woman watched them from the doorway, the firelight behind her turning her hair to silver flame. She smiled softly and whispered to the night, "The Creator has strange ways of giving back what was lost." When dawn came, it found them still standing together beneath the cottonwood tree, the same place where the cowboy had buried his mother. A single blossom had opened on its branch, delicate against the early light. The elder daughter reached out and touched it, her fingers trembling. "Spring came after all," she murmured. He looked at her, and something in him settled, a lifetime of loneliness easing into belonging. The cabin, once a shelter against the storm, had become a home. Yet in the hush of that moment, as birds stirred awake and the first warmth of morning kissed the plains, a quiet truth unfolded between them. Love, once found, asks to be protected just as fiercely as life itself. And far beyond the horizon, the wind began to rise again, soft, steady, carrying the faint echo of a new beginning.